Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Duve Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, the birdie bird to my Charlie, it's Mr. Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Just flush these cherry bombs down the toilet, my
Cool.
buddy.
Don't have a cow, man.
Remember cherry bombs?
Do I remember cherry bombs?
Neither do I.
I mean, don't think I've ever had or held or experienced a cherry bomb in my life, but I remember playing the Simpsons Nintendo game where the space aliens came down, and that was the weapon that you used against them. So
we're just slightly too young to have experienced cherry bombs, is the sad truth.
Is that true? Was like everyone in like Gen X just like playing with cherry bombs all the time?
I think so. I think cherry bombs were, dangerous. Notoriously dangerous. I mean, we had M80s, right? We had M like we could do some damage.
I mean, like, we had M80s. Like, what like, were they available to purchase at a fireworks store? Yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean,
and we did.
I mean, you're using a rather specific "we" here.
We
being you.
I had M80s.
I never in my life purchased an M80 from a fireworks store.
I never blew up a toilet though. So
yeah, no, me neither.
I was just like Charlie.
We were just born 5 years earlier. We could have been blowing up toilets left and right.
Yep, it's a shame.
This week on the show, it is time for our overview episode. We are taking one last look at Stephen King's fairy tale. This is the episode we like to do at the end of the books, where we kind of look over the book as a whole, look at it as a forest and not the individual trees, and kind of come to our final conclusion about this book. So this is it. This is the last one for fairy tale, which is the last one for this podcast, Matt. People made fun of me for it, but this is the penultimate episode. This is the last time. This is the ultimate penultimate.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess. I can't really keep track.
What do you mean you can't keep track?
I just do what I'm told from week to week, honestly. So, in 3 weeks, I'm going to be like, all right, Scott, time to sit down for Kingslingers. And you're going to be like, no, Matt, we talked about this.
Matt, did you not realize that it's over?
It'll happen.
That's okay. We can still watch the terrible Salem's Lot movie and talk about that in 3 weeks.
True.
Yeah. All right. So let's. We're also going to be, by the way, responding to some of your mailbag questions, which I have to say, most of you did a very good job at not taking my "we'll answer anything" and going insane with it. Now, I did say most of you, and you know who you are, and guess what? We're still going to read the questions.
Yeah. Of course.
Because we're men of our word.
Yeah. But we're going to make sure that you know what you did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they know. Don't worry. They know.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get into it, though, we did just want to remind you folks, as we said, next week is our final episode. It's the finale of the show. And one thing we always like doing in the finale, at least in the last 2 seasons, is play some recordings from our listeners talking about how much they love Stephen King, how much they love the books, and I guess how much they love the podcast. So we do have a voice mailbox, a virtual voice mailbox that you can dial on your phone and leave us a brief, and we cannot stress brief enough. We're talking about a minute, no longer. Please don't send us 20-minute messages as much as you want to. So you can dial that number and send us a voicemail, and we'll cut that into the very end of the episode, so we can send this podcast out not on our stupid voices, but on y'all's stupid voices.
That's right.
Matt, what is that phone number?
That number is not. Yeah, let me start that over completely. 719-357-5132.
That is correct. We'll also put that number in the show notes for you if you just blanked and weren't listening and need to see it written down somewhere. We said this last week, going to say it again. That number only works if you are in the United States for some reason. don't know why a Google virtual mailbox wouldn't work anywhere, but that's just the long and short of it. So if you are international and you do want to send us in a recording anyway, you can simply record yourself on your computer, save it as an MP3 or a WAV file, and then just email that to us, and we will do the same thing that we're going to do with the recordings in the voicemail box. So, yeah, once again, that number is 719-357-5132. Send those in. We look forward to hearing from y'all.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. Fairy tale. Let's do it. Let's talk about this book. It has been a week since we have completed reading the novel, and I want to get at the beginning of this episode your overall feeling on the book. You've had a little bit of time to sit with it, to think about it, to ponder it. What are you thinking about Fairy Tale?
Well, I enjoyed the book overall, in terms of, feelings. I enjoyed the character of Charlie Reed. He's quite a different protagonist than really any that I can remember easily from this whole journey we've been on together. And I also, I just have to say, it was fun doing this with you, where neither of us had read it, because I went back and I listened to some of our previous episodes on this book. Particularly, so the reason I went back specifically, I'll say this now, is like I have this feeling where it's hard for me to put this whole book in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of knew why, but then re-listening to the old episodes just kind of confirmed my belief, which is like it has so many distinct pieces that feel really different from each other, not in a bad way. And it's always, our good old Charlie Reed keeping it all together. But we start out with this almost low men in yellow coats sort of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
A boy finds some kind of healing by befriending an old man, and then we end up in a very fantastical, very meta fantasy story, fantasy fairy tale story. And yeah, like it's funny because I ended up liking this journey. I ended up also, I think, like enjoyed how we put a lot of things together. I also enjoyed how we would be like pretty hilariously wrong sometimes, but often when we were wrong, like I give us a little not I give us a little bit of a pass, I guess I'll say, because what we were doing is we were correctly noting like we're meant to wonder about this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would go crazy trying to fill in whatever that gap was and usually be wrong. But we weren't wrong that we were meant to sort of have a little question mark, or there was something dangling about that element of the story. That was a lot of meandering, but I think because you asked me how I feel about it, and then I talked for like 5 minutes. But I think the thing is, like, it's kind of a meander of a story, and so
Yeah.
So to figure out how you feel about it, you kind of have to think for a bit. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. I think ultimately I really like this book. I don't think my opinion has hugely changed from where it was talking about the story last week. I guess maybe I've cooled on it a little bit. But overall, I really liked this story. I agree with you. It's kind of meandering. I mean, it's interesting how much it reminds me of The Talisman, and it's not just because this is a story of a boy that travels to a magical land. But The Talisman felt like a very episodic story, and this is not episodic in the same way, but it does feel like a story that kind of switches gears multiple times. And I mean, like, the most abrupt gear shift is when Charlie gets captured and put into prison, and we just spend the next 150 pages or so doing a full scale prison story / battle royale tournament thing, which I didn't hate. Like, it's really interesting because I think all the pieces of this book are really, really good. It's just, I guess, the ongoing question for me is, do they add up into something great in the end? And I'm kind of torn on that right now. I think there's a lot of really fun ideas in here. There's a lot of moments I really love. I agree with you. I think the character of Charlie is great, which is interesting because I think some of the feedback we got from some of our listeners, the reason they didn't like the book is that they did not like Charlie. And some of the reviews I've read when I was kind of, after I read the book, I just kind of scoured the internet for some reviews just to see what people were thinking about this book. And a lot of people say they don't particularly like Charlie. They don't find him believable. They don't particularly like Empus as a place. It just didn't really. It seemed kind of lame and didn't work for them. And I saw this echoed multiple times, so it's not just like one person's opinion. And those are the parts that I don't agree with. But I do kind of wonder, thinking about this book as a whole, is like, does it come together totally in the way that I would have wanted it to? And I'm pretty divided on that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I like that, and maybe another lens of asking that question, other phrasing or approach of asking that question is like, what is the premise of this story?
Sure. Yeah.
And the point of saying that is like, I think you can almost, measure the like memorableness and popularity of a Stephen King novel by just like how succinctly you can state the premise. Man discovers a doorway to the past and tries to stop the JFK assassination. Family spends the winter at a haunted hotel.
Hmm.
Like, there's certain things where you just hear it and your mind immediately starts going like, oh yeah, huh, yeah. And then King is also having fun just exploring that idea. This book is one where it's almost got like two premises. It's like two premises, and I don't even know what they are. Like, I'm not, again, I enjoyed the book. And so this is only meant to be, I think you'll take this in the spirit I mean it, but like I still don't know what the premise of this book is. I know what the plot is. Like I know what the story is. I just don't know like what is this? Is this um I think the best we did at figuring out what we're doing with this book is like this is actually the story of Charlie healing and growing beyond this kid who was sort of terribly troubled by the death of his mother, but not really aware of it, into someone who had kind of mastered that and gone through a journey of growth, and it's a coming of age story, obviously.
Yeah.
Even that was kind of me trying to be succinct, and I still kind of made a run on sentence. So
Yeah, I mean, I think last week we spoke very confidently about the fact that this is definitely a book about a son and his father relationship healing, and a child getting over the sudden terrible death of their mother. And like, I'm not saying that like we were wrong, because I definitely think that's what it is. Uh, but what I am saying is like, if that is what the book is, it's pretty buried in the subtext of the story. Like, I think we accurately sussed out that subtext, but like in ways where I think some of the best King books aren't. It is kind of buried in that subtext a little bit,
mhm.
because like it's really interesting, this idea that like, if what we're saying is true, that this is a story about a son kind of learning to understand and eventually forgive his father, which I think there are elements of that in the ending, in how he deals with his anger and disappointment with Claudia, with Woody, with Leia, even to an extent, parallel perfectly with his experience with his father. It's interesting to make a book about that, a son getting over, their father's alcoholism, and what the choices he did hurt their family, and not have the father play a role in the story at all. Right? Like, I mean, he plays a role in the early part of the story, but then as soon as we get to Empus, he leaves the story and is essentially this kind of black box that, by the way, I went back and looked, and I still think it is very accurate that King wanted us to constantly be wondering if this man was going to wind up dead, um, when Charlie returns from Empus.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. I think that was not just you and I going crazy. I think that's in the book. I think that's part of what King wants you to wonder. And so it's like, it's a question of if that's going to be the driving force of the emotional theming of the story. Should Charlie's father have played a bigger role? And I guess arguably, like, if it's about, like, I very very confidently said last week, Leia is a surrogate for Charlie's mother, like that she's a character surrogate for Charlie's mother. I still think that's accurate, but Leia also played a very limited role in the book until the very very end, right?
Mm.
And so, like, again, if we're right about this, and I think we are, it just is interesting how minimized and subtextual it all is. Is, I guess, me repeating what
Yeah.
I've said already.
Yeah, just it's funny. I didn't realize this until I listened to what we had said. We were talking about Leia being a mother surrogate from the very first time she shows up, and we did it consistently
It
because
just felt like it was the case, right? Like it just
yeah,
felt like it to me.
it's dribbled throughout every time she shows up. She's always associated with something that's associated with his mother in
Mhm.
some sort of daisy chain fashion.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that we haven't mentioned in this sort of back and forth so far is radar,
True.
which, like, if you were gonna just do a dust jacket cover summary or premise, even maybe it's like a boy tries to save his dog by taking the dog on a risky and perilous journey to a magical land, and that is actually a description of the plot. It's just so much other stuff happens that, and also, like, that is his motive. Like, that's why
Yeah.
he does it.
Yeah.
He doesn't go to Empes to save the land from Gog Magog. He goes to save his dog, but he's just like he gets caught up in it, and then he's like, this incredibly moral, upstanding person, so he kind of can't help himself. Um,
Well, even that, I mean, you're right, but even that is an interesting thing that the book does because there was this moment in the book where he's like heading to Lillimar, like with the intent of just saving Radar, but he's got this handmaiden to Leia in the back of his mind saying help her, right? And he's
mhm,
kind of being pulled back and forth between this uncertainty of what she should do, like. But then the way the book rolls out the plot, he doesn't actually ever like get to make that choice because like the second he saves Radar, he's swept up into this mad escape from the city that ends with him captured and imprisoned, and then like he ends up assuming the mantle of Prince Charlie, like not out of choice but almost out of necessity. Like
mhm,
he's got to escape from this this position he's in. And I guess you could argue like there is a moment where by the he like escapes the city and they're meeting in the storage shed and kind of deciding what their next move is. And I guess you could argue there's a moment where he could then have said, "Nah, I'm just taking my dog and going home." But the book doesn't even offer that as a choice. Like by then, you're kind of convinced he's just going to be that prince. So I think it is weird how you're absolutely right. That's kind of what was built into the story, but I feel like it's not dramatized in that
mhm.
way.
Yeah, right. This is total conjecture, but I almost feel like the initial thought seed that the story grew around was something as simple as, like, a boy has an elderly dog that he loves and he wants to save the dog's life, and then the anti-aging device from that Ray Bradbury story is in a fantasy land, and he can take the like it totally seems to me the kind of thing that maybe King would think of, because like he has a dog
Hmm.
and loves dogs, and like that is a compelling, like, yeah, wouldn't you
Yeah.
try to save your dog's life, um even if there were some level of personal risk to it.
Yeah, and totally. And I also think the dog is a perfect like metaphor for his inability to save his mother, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
perhaps the guilt he feels, the ridiculous guilt he feels that like the certain survivor guilt that anyone has when a loved one is dead and you're not. And so Radar is kind of his do-over, his chance that this is an animal that he loves that's dying and he can do something about it, so he must do something about it. But again, the book does this really interesting thing where we have that being the driving force of the plot up until a certain point that we just forcefully remove Radar from the book for like 150 pages. And like it's interesting because we keep circling around this prison slash battle royale section of the novel, which I liked. I liked it when I read it. We had great things to say about it. I think it works very well. It's very dramatic and effective. But like one of the constant refrains I saw when reading what people thought about this book was that was the part of the book that started to lose them. And I think it's really interesting that, the kind of conclusion is that just part's just not very good, not very interesting. And my kind of path into this is not that those people are necessarily wrong, but they're just diagnosing problem incorrectly, where it's like it's not like that section of the book is bad or lesser than any of their sections. It just removes us so far from the driving forces of the narrative so far. Like the decision to basically cut Radar, who is the driving force of the narrative, out of the book for pages and pages and pages, is I think why people don't like that section as much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, right? Because I think that at a simplistic level, narrative is like opening parentheses and closing parentheses, where an open parentheses is like a question or mystery or something you're worried about happening, something you want to see happen. It's an expectation, it's the creation of that sense of anxiety and tension. And then the closed parentheses is like, and then we resolve that positively, negatively, ambiguously, whatever. And like, it actually does start to annoy most people if you're just like opening more and more nested parentheses. And then you're like, I don't even like, you're expecting me to care about this, but I care about that thing that happened.
Yeah.
I still care about Charlie's dad, who we haven't even heard about in 200 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we haven't gotten an update on that. And then there's Radar, and then there, like, it is, and I don't know what I would have done differently, but it's like, yeah, I think that's basically it. Is you're so far like down the stack of things you care about by the time you get to like the battle royale. You're just like, okay, sure, like I like it, like I do. You and I, it's not like we weren't enjoying the fact that, or like caught up in the tension of like, how is he going to beat Claw? Like, how is he going to get out of the situation? It's just a lot of our mind was preoccupied with this, like all these other questions that had stacked up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not to like make assumptions about the writing process, but like it very much feels to me like this is a book that he had a very clear vision of where to start and where he was going to go early. Like I think you're right that he said like this is going to be, he's probably sitting at home with his dog. He loves his dog. He's thinking about this idea about dogs dying. I think this is such a fascinating idea. I watched a comedy special by the actress Rachel Bloom that just came out not too long ago, and she was basically talking about in pandemic times she was pregnant and also just like was dealing with a lot of things very poorly, and one of the things she was dealing with very poorly was this abstract concept that one day her dog's going to die, and this really fascinating thing that you have around these animals that we get that we love so much, that you get an animal kind of knowing you're going to outlive it, and like that being a good thing, actually. Like it's good actually that you're going to outlive your dog. Like that's the thing you want. You do not want to die before your animal that's only going to live 15 years, right? But it's this kind of like constant push and pull that we bring these animals into our lives. We love them so completely, and we know that we're going to live longer than them. And that's also a very interesting kind of arrangement for a man as old as Stephen King as well, where, if he gets a new dog today, there's a chance that algorithm doesn't quite pan out that same way, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, like it's a really interesting thing that I was thinking about with just the concept of outliving our pets. And so this is the thing we're concerned with. This is the thing we care about, and then we get all these new interesting characters thrown in, and it's not like they're not interesting, but like I really feel like he had this clear vision of we're going to get to the city, we're going to bring Radar back to life, it's going to be this triumphant moment, and then something is going to happen. Yeah. And I don't think he quite knew what the something was yet. And I think eventually he settled on this idea of arrest and battle royale, and all those ideas like excited him and are interesting, and I understand why, but there was a problem. It's like, well, we can't have the dog with him in prison. That doesn't make any sense that the dog just gets to share a cell with him in prison. What is that? And so he had to kind of write Radar out of the book temporarily. And that kind of snowballed into all the problems we were just talking about.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like we're saying a lot of negative stuff. I think we're just identifying like what didn't work great, not like why the book was a total failure.
I think what I'm trying to do actually ultimately is like, we went into this book knowing that there was a very like divisive opinion on it, And now that I finished it, I think I understand
Mm-hmm.
that divisiveness while not completely agreeing with it, maybe a little bit, but not completely.
Yeah.
I think I understand where it's coming from.
Yeah. Let me try one more cut on this, because I feel basically, after kind of thinking about it and marinating on it even more strongly than ever, that he had, you know, Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces open on the table next to him as he was writing this, or at the very least, the stations of the hero's journey firmly in his mind, because more than any other Stephen King novel that I can think of, this is a classic hero's journey.
Sure.
And to me, I totally get why he would want to do that. And in fact, I have no problem with the hero's journey at all, but I don't think that he's that kind of writer. And I think maybe it feels a little like strained, or I think yes, I think strained is a fine word. Like things feel a little stretched out, or the pacing feels a little off, because I do actually think he's trying to follow this formula, which is just not the way he normally does storytelling. Normally, he's
Sure.
like, he writes in a very organic way, where it's like, and then what happens, and then whatever his enormous imagination tells him. But in this case, he had to be like, well, we have to do the abyss now, because that's what's on the. I mean, do you think I'm off base? First of all, that's a easy kind of yes no.
No, I don't think you're off base. I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think this is a book that's obviously like, it's trying to channel a lot of classical fairy tale. It is trying to do a lot of things at once, right? Like, I also think the reason why he's like doing the battle royale prison break stuff is because this is like modern day like fairy tale storytelling for children, is this YA type of storytelling that was and is very prevalent in the 2010s. So I think part of it's like this fun idea of marrying like classic fairy tale to modern storytelling, meant for children, together with like more adult fairy tale storytelling, which is the whole Lovecraftian side of it. And you're absolutely right, putting this in a shell of the hero's journey. Which, I mean, it's not like he's never done this before. Like, again, the Talisman, I think, operates on a lot of hero's journey-esque ideas. But I do think this book specifically is like almost like calling up the imagery, like the Campbellian imagery, like specifically.
Yeah. 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 I think anytime anytime a writer like him, who's very creative and centers his whole style around character, tries to follow a formula, it's going to have issues like these.
Yeah, yeah. So with that in mind, one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about is this concept, this idea of Charlie as the bad prince. Like, he is kind of the promised prince, but like a major plot beat of this story is the fact that at the center of Charlie there is some well of darkness. Now, he doesn't fully embrace that well of darkness. He manages to avoid it in the end. But we talked about this a little last week, where we weren't quite sure, and perhaps a little disappointed, that like in the final moments, it wasn't necessarily the darkness in Charlie that served him specifically and textually, or that he had to choose for or against. It was just kind of there inside him ultimately. So I guess what's your kind of final conclusion on the idea of Charlie as the Dark Prince? What are you thinking?
Okay, so I do have thoughts on this, but they're not solid or complete. So hopefully we can hash this out. So we introduce the idea of the Jungian, the idea of the Jungian. Let's just leave it at that. Early in the story, Charlie finds this book in Bowditch's house that's like, the Jungian approach to fairy tales, and like Jung was all about basically using the idea of archetypes to think about human psychology. Like, Freud had the id and superego and ego and all of that, and Jung had the archetypes. I'm simplifying, obviously, but basically, like, you can see why Jung would be a relevant concept in a story which is all built out of archetypes or tropes, as we call them in our conversations typically. But really, all these characters, the giant, the cursed king, the exiled princess, like, these are all archetypes. And one of the most, I would say, famous archetypes is the shadow. Actually, I'm not even sure if shadow is technically an archetype, but shadow is a central Jungian concept. And the shadow is like all of the sort of unacceptable stuff about yourself. And again, somebody's probably going to say, Matt, you got this all wrong. But my understanding is, like, one of the goals of Jungian psychotherapy is to integrate with your shadow. Like, you discover, like, what is this shadow that I am refusing to see or accept about myself. You come to see it, you come to accept it, and you integrate it. That doesn't mean that you suddenly, all of the things that you thought were bad, you now think are good. That means that you, like, whatever it is about you that is causing this unacceptable, unintegrated, sort of rejected part of yourself to exist, you understand, you come to understand, why is it that you have this kind of division? Why is it that you're not integrated? And you integrate yourself. And so I seems clear to me in retrospect, although it wasn't at the time, that Dark Charlie is the shadow.
Hmm.
It's Charlie's shadow. All of the bad stuff he did with Birdie Bird that he won't even tell us. It's almost classically kind of shadow coded that he won't even say it. He won't even say what he did because he can't accept it. He's almost like not allowing it to be part of his self because he's not including it in the story.
Sure.
And by the end, I think what he does is he integrates his shadow. Like, that's, I'm much less confused about this now, actually. I think what he's done is he's taken the angry, violent parts of it, or unforgiving, malicious, vindictive, all these parts of himself that he just couldn't accept because I'm Charlie, I'm this nice, moral guy. He couldn't accept those parts, and he took those and he's like, sometimes you got to kick people's asses, and he integrated it like that's so that's what I feel now.
Yeah, I like this, and I mean, it's not even necessarily saying that, like, Charlie could not have defeated Gog Magog without this integration, but the payoff of this is we get the story that Charlie has been holding back from us the entire book. We get after that moment. We get after that moment of integration, that moment of defeat of the evil and integration of the shadow is when he finally admits to Leia and to us the worst act he did with Birdie, which I mean, it is fun, like, going back, and I went back and listened to some of our earlier episodes as well, where we're wrestling with this idea of, like, we obviously knew and clocked correctly that King was bombarding us with these ideas of how shitty Charlie is for a reason, and we were, like, clocking that and saying, yes, this has purpose, it's purpose driven. But I remember specifically, like, the moments where you were like, doesn't really seem like he's done anything that bad. Like, I think we, like, yeah, throw a bomb thrown out of school is, like, not a good thing to do, but, like, ultimately, like, that's just a kid being a stupid kid that's not fully recognizing why that kind of thing is serious. But the reveal at the end, I think you said it last week, is, like, was perhaps not as bad as your chocolate bar thinking led it to be, but was still pretty awful, like, a pretty specifically victim-full crime. Like, we talked about the things he was talking about that he had done being victimless crimes, but, like, that was a crime with a victim, a clear victim. And so I think his ability to reveal that to us at the end of the story is kind of a moment of integration, as you put it, that works really well. I guess my only and I was thinking about this as I was talking, like, sometimes you refute your own argument as you're saying it. The only thing I would say about this is I don't know if that works with the structure of the book being a guy relaying events to us 9 years later. Like, I was thinking about this a lot.
Yeah.
Because, like, he says earlier in the book, here's these awful things, and I'm not I'm not actually going to tell you them because they're so bad. Like, I'm just not going to tell them to you. And then like he does by the end of the book, like he changes his mind. And I guess perhaps you could argue, like, in a very Kingian way, like the act of writing this story allowed him to fully understand it in a level perhaps he hadn't before, which is interesting because like it kind of maybe undoes the growth and process he makes as a person in the timeline of the story, and just tosses that forward 9 years into the future. It's like, until Charlie, you actually wrote down these events, you did not fully process them, and all that growth that we're giving you credit for and this integration that we're giving you credit for was not actually fully integrated until you sat down and typed it out on a piece of paper. Um, so I do wonder if like the format, the first person perspective, the classic King thing of this first person story where the guy is relaying these events to you after they've occurred, kind of gets in the way of what he's trying to do there a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, I just think you're right. It's one of the risks of doing the first person. I'm telling you a story that happened to me, but I'm telling you later, is like
Mm-hmm.
all of the story beats in the moment. You can't help but feel like, okay, but that happened a long time ago. You're just
Yeah.
writing it down now. So it's not really, it doesn't have that same sense of urgency as like anything could happen. They could die. They could die right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's everything turned out fine. Basically, we kind of already know that. And then furthermore, not only did it turn out fine, but your ability to, like you said, the person writing the story, their perspective in writing the story becomes like an active component of what was written and why it was written that way.
Yeah.
Um, I probably wasn't thinking about this as much as you were, but it definitely occurred to me in a few places where I was just like, well, why would you write it this way? um, it didn't ruin anything for me, certainly.
I mean,
Um,
it's only in looking back at it now that I like am clocking it as a problem. So like, it's hard for me to
mhm.
say in the act of reading it, I was like, oh, this isn't working on me because X, Y, and Z. It's only like after diving like 12 levels down with this thing, like surfacing with like an idea of like, oh, maybe the structure got in its own way.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with you on that. This,
So, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna try to make a connection to like you and I were both bothered by this conversation that he has with Leia at the end, where it just feels like kind of an uneven conversation, and it has him. It's where he tells the story about throwing the crutches into the pond, and then he says, "I stole your crutches," and we were kind of like, "What? Like what?
What
Like
does that mean?
what does that mean?" And I was gonna try to make a connection to this idea of like doing the hard thing because it needs to be done, and that being part of his journey and part of his like integration of his shadow is kind of coming to grips with the idea that a man has to do kind of ugly things um that are going to feel bad, like for some greater purpose. And I actually think that's what he was going for with the idea of saying like he stole Leia's crutches, because to him it feels cruel to have done that,
hmm
but he had to do it. I think that's the intended connection. It just didn't land for either of us, I think, in the moment.
Yeah, I get that argument. I think I could agree with that for sure. Um, yeah, the thing I wanted to take this though is it kind of brings me to the other thing I wanted to talk about, and that we said we would circle back around to this week, which is this idea that the book really seemed to be setting us up for a bad ending, and I
Mhm.
think we got a much happier ending than we were figuring we were. So I went back through the book and I looked at some quotes about this, and I pulled one for you here, that I just wanted to discuss with you. This is Charlie, I think, right when he and Bowditch have kind of settled in with each other. It says, I tell you these things not because they are particularly interesting, but because they establish a routine, one that continued through the rest of that spring and most of the summer. In some ways, those were good months. I felt useful, needed. I liked myself better than I had in a long time. Only the end was terrible. And it's that last sentence that like really got us. And it's not the
Mhm.
only one that existed in the early parts of this book where King leaves Charlie on this last moment of like everything's going great, but
Mhm.
it's not gonna for long. And like, I mean, I guess to give the book the benefit of the doubt, like it's not as if he doesn't end the book on kind of a depressing note, right? Like I think this is ultimately a book with a good ending for our characters. Everything's better, the evil is vanquished. But I think the depressing note for Charlie is this idea that he has to be cut off from this place that he loves and these people that he loves. And again, like this realization that he cut off from his mother. She's dead. She's gone. Um, but I don't know. Like, do you feel like is this a thing King does constantly? Right? Like he's always kind of played with this idea of, and we called it out every single time it's happened but that was nothing compared to what was going to happen later, and that kind of thing. And so I think we've just like been so primed for it that we just like have been primed to assume to either be told explicitly by King what is going to happen next or be primed for the absolute worst. Like
Mhm.
in a book like Doomakey, if that sentence only the end was terrible was in there, I would be like, yeah, 100%. Your fucking daughter dies. Like
Yeah.
that. Like I'm with you on this one, man. On this one, like I just struggle to be as with him, and I think we said this last week too, where he was like, where he finishes the last real chapter of the book, where like, there's your happy ending. I know you wanted it. There it is. I'm like, why are you so angry? um, but ultimately, like, I don't know. I think it's just this idea of being cut off from this place. Ultimately, I don't
Mhm.
know. What do you think?
Yeah. In retrospect, I'm not even really sure. Like the Bowditch dying is painful for him,
Yeah. I mean,
and
maybe
then
ultimately, like, maybe that's just me misplacing what he's talking about here. Like, he could just be
yeah,
talking about the end being terrible, being Bowditch's death, and not everything in Empus.
the,
Like,
the,
I
the,
don't know.
right, like because what you just said at the time, I believe we both interpreted it as like, oh, so the end of this story is going to be terrible, and I think he actually just meant like the end of this summer when Bowditch dies of a heart
Yeah.
attack.
Yeah. Very,
Uh,
very true. Very possible. Yep.
I still thought that there were a lot of other references of like, this is a sad story.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can tell this story. I think it begins with like, I think I can tell this story, even though it's so, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for me to tell. And the truth is, like, a lot of kind of rough shit does happen when he's in the prison. If anything, I feel like it would be more traumatic to go into to go through that prison situation and deal with all your friends dying around you and be under this like risk of death than Charlie really lets on. But it's like, well, Charlie is just this, remarkable, tough kid,
Mm-hmm.
who he doesn't seem to suffer that much. So it's kind of when you say it's horrible, it's like, well, you did fine.
Yeah.
Like, and the dog came out of it fine,
Yeah.
and your dad came out of it fine. Basically, everybody except your compatriots in prison came out of it fine.
Yeah.
And it's fine to feel bad about them, but I don't know. Maybe we'd feel different if Charlie were more like obviously traumatized by his time in Deep Maline.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean that was never my read about the negativeness of the ending that he was talking about. Despite
Mhm.
yes, that being a very traumatizing part of his life. I mean, I would think the way the book posits it, like his time deep under the castle at the well of Gogmagog was almost more traumatizing to him than his time in Deep Maline, because he like
Mhm.
saw this brief window into like the forever eternal evil of
Yeah.
of the universe, and that really fucked him up. Like when he says at the end of the novel that he has nightmares fairly often, but slowly over time, the good dreams of Empus have overtaken the nightmarish dreams of Empus. I guess my interpretation of that was not that he was dreaming about his time in Deep Maline, but that he was dreaming about the dark well and Gogmagog and those type of things. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we are meant to think it was kind of a combination of the both, and maybe he is more traumatized by his time in the prison than we thought. I mean, he did
Mhm.
lose a lot of friends that he made there. Like that certainly is a traumatizing event for any person. Like you meet these people, they become your compatriots. They bow down before you, they depend on you, and you lead them to their death essentially.
Yeah.
That's got to fuck you up for sure.
Right. I agree, and yet I'm not sure that that's dramatized for me. I think
Yeah.
part of it's just that this is written first person. Like I'm thinking about the ending of it as like a contrast, where it's like this is another scene where you're fighting you like your team, your quartet, your characters you care about are fighting a Lovecraftian monster. It's kind of a similar situation. You know, you're underground fighting a Lovecraftian monster. But for me, there was something actually much like more scary and unsettling about like the idea of the deadlights
Yeah.
um, than anything that we saw. It's like, okay, it's a big squishy Cthulhu dragon. Ooh, like it, again, I enjoyed that part, but it didn't like make me unnerved in the
Sure.
same way
Sure.
that like the idea of the deadlights makes you unnerved. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
No,
and
I
I
get that.
and it's like why it's like I think a lot of it has to do with the limitations of first person, you know, uh, retelling. Honestly, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you might be right there. I like. I want to. I want to kind of finish on something positive because I feel like unintentionally for either of us, we've been more negative than we wanted to be. I mean, like let's be clear here. Like I really enjoyed this book. I loved my time with it. I was emotionally touched by it. I think it is like it is kind of ultimately like stripped down like a beautiful examination of a boy and his dog story. Like the Radar Charlie relationship that it's at the core of much of this book is remarkable and wonderful, and you
Hmm.
can tell it's written by a man who loves dogs very much.
Hmm.
I had a scare with my dog. We've talked about this at the beginning of the show that my dog is very old. I had a scare with her earlier last week where I came home and she had peed in the kitchen, which is not something she normally does, and there was blood in it, which is like, oh no, my dog is 13 years old and now peeing blood. So I like kind of assumed the worst, but just a UTI, yay. Um,
Hmm.
she's fine, except she also has arthritis. So now she's on arthritis medicine as well, just like freaking Radar.
Hmm.
So just a lot of feels I had in comparison with this book over the last week going through this kind of stuff, because I do know that she's not going to be around forever, and this arthritis medicine is probably going to be something she'll be taking until she dies, probably.
Hmm.
But I find it absolutely beautiful, and I just want to say, like, one other thing that I just loved about this book was getting to experience it on a level playing field with you. Like, I know you really enjoyed it as
Hmm.
well, but like, it had been a long time for me, and there were definitely moments where it was a little scary, where I was like, normally I'm sitting on kind of a throne of assurity that like I'm not going to say anything stupid for the most part. I might pronounce a word wrong and be made fun of for that. But like the theming and the ideas of the book and the direction I'm trying to lead you in to where I think the book is going, or I guess in this case where I know the book is going, like that's not ever a moment of like I'm like sometimes people disagreed with me, which is fine, but like I was fairly confident in my arguments every time because I had the full scope of what the book was doing. And yeah, you're flying blind with this one. And
Hmm.
so it felt like a lot more pressure on me specifically. But I mean, not in a bad way. Like it's good pressure. Like good pressure is good, right? So um, I'm not saying that like I think there is still ultimately like value in having one person that has read the thing leading the other person. Like I like that format and I like that formula, and I'm not saying I want to throw that away, but like I think getting to do this thing that we did this time every once in a while, I think is ultimately good for both of us. It
Hmm.
keeps me on my toes, and it maybe takes the pressure off you just a little bit temporarily. So I like it ultimately. I think it was a fun experiment. It was something I didn't know if it was going to work for this format show and this thing we had planned here, but I think it ultimately worked really well.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun having a different kind of conversation with you, where we would both be like, "Well, what about this? Well, I don't know, but what about that?"
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it made it more of a back and forth in that specific way, rather than me saying something and you doing the like, I don't know, which, we have all kinds of good conversations, but that's one type of conversation that we can really never have when you've read the book and I haven't.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
I just have to keep my mouth shut or shrug sarcastically.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, looking forward to our show that's following this one, Flanagan's Wake, I don't think there's going to be a huge ton of opportunities for that. I think some of the movies I haven't seen, the early Flanagan movies, but like from a book perspective, I've read Gerald's Game. I've read The Haunting of Hill House. I have not read the Turn of the Screw and those stories, the short stories. But I have like watched The Haunting of Bly Manor, so like I generally know how I know it's very different, but like I generally know the story of Return of the Screw, and like like the Poe stories. I haven't read all of the Poe stories, but also those are going to be us covering short stories, multiple short stories per week, so there won't be the opportunity for like the I wonder where this is going to go stuff. So I'm only saying this to say like I don't necessarily think that the next show will have a lot of opportunities to do this, but it's something I want to keep in mind because it's something I ultimately enjoyed. And I hope there's ways to kind of integrate this in the type of podcasting we do going forward.
Yeah, me too. I enjoy it. I agree.
Yeah. All right, Matt, anything else you wanted to say about Fairy Tale? Actually, yeah, like I gave my like kind of positive final message. Do you have a kind of positive final message you want to leave with this book, just so we make sure we weren't being super negative the whole time?
Totally. I'm just thinking back week to week how eager I always was to listen to it and how much I enjoyed just the act of setting aside the time to listen to it, and how invested I was. I think that's one thing I wanted to hit upon is like I was very invested in the story. I was very invested in Charlie as a character. He felt very alive to me. And I cared about what was happening, and I cared, like that. Like what better compliment to an adventure story than just like I was thoroughly invested in what was happening to these characters. I really wanted good things to happen. I really didn't want bad things to happen. He just totally had me in all of the ways that that you want a book to have you. So
yeah, no, that's great. I love that. And like I do think like ultimately one of the things I was unsure about was like, is this going to be a fitting final book for us, right? Like we've picked this as the last book of the show, not for any specific reason outside of like we were going decade by decade and this is the one for the last decade. So I was a little worried, like, is this going to be a proper send off? Is this going to be a good final book? And I actually ultimately think it is, because while this is not the same as the Dark Tower, it is King like playing in these ideas of this return to like the world of fantasy, and like not only fantasy but like mixing fantasy and our world in these really interesting ways that like sometimes the best of the Dark Tower is having Eddie and Roland in this kind of comedy of differences of worlds coming together. It's also, I think, some of the best of the Talisman as well. So King really likes to play in this idea of transitioning between worlds and plucking people from one world and putting them in another, in ways that like it's fun and nice seeing him return to that. Now, of course, the news was recently that King is writing another Dark Tower novel, or possibly another Talisman novel. He was unclear. Like he says he's returned to Midworld and to the territories. What does that mean? I don't know. But he's going to be returning to this world again. But like as a send off for this iteration of the show, I think this was ultimately a really good book to end on, because we do kind of go back to our roots in a certain way.
Yeah, I agree. It did feel like a fitting ending. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yep. All right, Matt, are you ready? Are you ready for the final mailbag? Are you ready for it?
Let's do it.
Let's get into it. You want to read the first question?
Yes. From Herd Forestry. Kellen's destruction reminded me of how you all discussed during Salem's Lot that King had originally written Dr. Cody's death to be by rats, but it was cut and we never got the payoff of the rats, just the knives. Was King finally getting his rat death?
That's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember that King is like scared of rats specifically. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea of being eaten to death, eaten alive rather, by a horde of rats would be something that if he never got a chance to put it in, he might just be like, yeah, sure, throw that in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Also, there was something extra like visually compelling about the idea that he's like electrocuting the rats as they're eating him. Like that's just a great idea.
No, it's really
Uh,
cool. I love it.
They have a second part to this question that says, from the missing poster, we see that Charlie's middle name is McGee. Can't be a coincidence. What is your uh what is your favorite Easter egg, King Easter egg that he's put in his own works, and favorite King crossover character from the 3 seasons?
Interesting. So you might not know this. Charlie McGee is the name of the little girl from Firestarter. I know we watched I don't think we ever watched the original Firestarter on Levels of the Tower. We just watched like the terrible, awful recent remake of it that was so
Uh-huh.
bad. But yeah, her name is Charlie McGee. So I didn't clock that at all. That's funny. I definitely read the missing poster, but I didn't see that at all. That's great.
I don't remember that either. Oh well. Favorite Easter egg. Favorite Easter egg.
There's so many.
Yeah, like if we're just going, I mean, I guess I don't know. There's so many different things that you could call an Easter egg. Like I love the idea of like, nozzle of cola showing up in
Yeah.
various books, and it's like a weird. It's like, what does it mean? It's just, it strikes me as a very Stephen King sense of humor specific sort of thing to do, where there's sort of no point to it other than just to be like a wink,
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Nozzle of cola is my answer.
There you go. I like that. I really like the Pennywise stuff that shows up in the Dark Tower. I think I'm trying to remember which book that was in. Was it in the Wastelands? I think I can't remember. There's just some hints towards Pennywise in one of the Dark Tower books that I enjoy, because it doesn't ultimately matter to the story. It's just like fun. Like I think that's
Mhm.
what an Easter egg is, right? Like defining Easter egg here. It's like just a fun, as you said, wink that doesn't ultimately matter too much, but it's just King having fun.
Yeah.
Um, there's also one in the book, a book that you haven't read, Billy Summers, dealing with the Overlook Hotel, that I really 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 enjoyed.
Cool. And then favorite King crossover characters from the whole show.
Father Callahan is mine, like for sure. Easy answer.
Yeah, that was definitely the one I was reaching for. I'm just wondering if I had like a number 2, just so we don't have the same answer. Um, I mean, I guess sure, just for the sake of having a different answer, I love that Bev shows up in 11/22/63,
Oh,
even if it's
that's such a
brief.
great, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
man. I love that so much. Yeah. Great answers. Thanks for the question.
yeah.
Next, we have Busy Dad 82 who says, is it Midworld? Does it matter? I'm glad you guys get into this. I don't think it is, and I don't think it matters anyway. But one of the things that bugs me is the amount of times he said the thing. He made such a point at the end of hinting that it doesn't matter, yet he still wrote these quotes from previous novels. Do you think that's something he just can't help doing? Is it fan service? I mean, look at the covers of this book. That Eye of the Crimson King imagery elicits an expectation from constant readers that the book doesn't deliver on. I don't think it takes away from the book's messages, but it does seem a bit like a fake out. Thoughts? Matt, what do you think about this?
So, I said, I think I was pretty consistent over the last several episodes that I thought it was Midworld because every non-Earth land is Midworld.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought about this a bit more, and I was like, well, I mean, like it actually seems like he's actively trying to say something specifically different, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this idea of the well that goes down from Earth into Impus, and then a well that goes down from Impus into Lovecraft land. And it's like, well, that's not really like it. It seems to do violence to the idea of what he's saying, to just say like, yeah, the first well goes down to Midworld, and then the second well goes down to the Prim, and it's like, maybe that's that doesn't seem right. Like that doesn't seem like the feeling or or it seems more like this is just a magical world called Impus. And so it's like maybe he's trying to create some space and okay, here's another thing I was thinking about. Just the phrase "there are other worlds than these." We did a little bit on this a couple
Yeah.
of episodes ago because it's like, well, there's kind of only two, but it's like, well, no, like I think maybe that's what he's doing in this book actually is to be like, no, there's Impus and there's Midworld and there's Earth and um there's like every story is its own world. Every story is its own world. It's reductive to just be like, let me catalog this according to my, you know, uh, comic book guy, shelving system. Just like have it be every story is its own world. I don't know. I don't know. It is funny that he can't keep himself from saying the thing,
Yeah.
even when he's sort of trying to not do that. And I don't know what to make of that. But Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe an uncharitable read, but it might be the accurate one that he just can't help himself sometimes. Like I don't know if he thinks about fan service specifically. Like I don't think he would call it fan service, even if he would say, "Oh, my readers are going to like this," which is kind of the textbook definition of fan service. But I also think like he likes. I mean, like this is such an interesting thing, and I think this is a perfect thing to talk about on like one of our last episodes. Is like the King concept of a multiverse has always just kind of been Easter eggs. Like it's
Mhm.
always just kind of been this thing that like, why am I tying all these books together? Why am I making connection between all of them? Why are they linking all this together into some greater idea? Oh, it's fun. Does it
Mhm.
ultimately matter? Like that's the argument I made at the end of the Dark Tower. Like, does it ultimately matter that every single one of these other books touches the Dark Tower in some way? Not really. Not from a character perspective or a plot perspective. Like it's just like a fun thing that he likes doing. So like why did the cover of this book have a well that is made to look like the Crimson King's eye? Well, first of all, the author doesn't make the cover. So like but I mean, I think there's a compelling enough argument that that's just the eye of Gog Magog, right? And
Uh-huh.
like but the ultimate answer is because it's fun and he wants you to feel like these worlds are connected, like he wants all these worlds to be connected in some greater larger cosmos because he thinks it's fun.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to mean more than that, but ultimately like it is kind of ironic that he specifically tells us at the end of this book it doesn't matter what this world is or where it came from. Or I mean honestly, like part of that is poking fun at the people desperately wanting this to be Midworld, but I also think perhaps poking fun at people that get frustrated with King's world building at times because he just doesn't focus on world building very much. Like this is a novel that almost by necessity has more world building than a lot of what King has written. But like still even that, it's like, I don't know. I'm not gonna explain any of this shit to you actually. Like only the parts that matter to the ongoing story you'll get any idea of. And that's
Mhm.
it. And the rest he just kind of shrugs it off because that's what he does.
Yeah. There's also the million times more pretentious answer to say, like, in the Tolkienian sense of like sub creation, every story is actually connected because every story is part of is a sub creation that is part of the greater creation,
Hmm.
and like all of our lives are connected to each other. All stories are connected to our lives, and therefore to each other. Every every story is in conversation with the literary history of the canon of human, like it like I think he kind of sees it that way too. Like he likes the idea that all stories are connected, and so he just you know dives into it. He's like,
Yeah.
sure, yeah, all stories are connected. All my stories are explicitly connected, and this encourages you um, to explore them. And then also, hey, by the way, here's a reference to Lord of the Flies. Here's a reference to Watership Down. You leave the Stephen King network, you go off into the greater world of story.
Yeah.
Um, and in that sense, Watership Down is part of Midworld. No.
No, I love that answer. It's extremely on Matt brand, so I think it's great.
Great. All right, next question from Hobo Demon. In Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, the action opens up with Vonnegut describing waking up with morning breath that smelled of mustard gas and roses, which later becomes established as a motif signaling death. This conveys the crux of the story that Vonnegut's experience in war caused something inside him to die, and that recovery would require him to express that. Expression has come to be used mainly in the context of art and communication, but it is derived very directly from the Four Humors model of the effects of glands on emotions, meaning to squeeze fluid out. Given that context, what do you think King was going for doylistically in Wolves of the Kala when Roland did a jizz dance while people sang, "Come Kamala, come Kamala"? Was he perhaps expressing his own spirited intentions to play through the pain after his accident and ejaculate the story to his audience, just as Roland danced through his unexplained aches?
So the thing about this question, Hobo Demon, is you had us in the first half, like really good. Like that first sentence or first paragraph, some good shit. And then and then we move on to the second half. And you are one of the people that I was thinking of when I said most of you did not take advantage of our will answer anything.
I'm actually going to try to take this seriously.
Okay, go for it.
The idea that I'm going to cut it down to just the idea that Roland's dance through the pain is a metaphor for Stephen King continuing to write his story despite the fact that he is in horrible agony.
Why did we call it a jizz dance? Is there
Kamala, come? It's a fertility dance specifically, right?
I mean, yeah, but there's no actual jizzing during the dance, right?
It's all about corn, which is
which as we know,
to Stephen King is like more explicitly more sexual than jizz, actually.
Yeah. Who needs Viagra when you have corn?
Yeah. And my answer is yes. I do find that a compelling connection. I mean, especially if we remember that, like, he literally later says that Roland's pain is like his pain directly.
Yeah, I mean, no, quite literally the painful, like, all the wounds he has are just the Stephen King's accident wounds, right? That's like textual in the novel. So yeah, I think there is something to that. Like, just largely Roland's working through his pain, not just in the jizz dance, but in all the final moments of all three of these books, as Roland is breaking down and suffering from this incredible pain, is King working through the pain. Yeah. I would not say he's ejaculating his story to the audience, Hobo Demon. I would not say that. You said that. Let's make that clear. But yes, ultimately, I think I agree.
Yeah, I'll ask him this question if we ever interview him verbatim.
Please do. All right. Okay. Row 2424 says, first, Scott, what other King books have you not read yet, if any? And if so, why have you not read them? Well, with Fairy Tale done, the only King book I have not read is Rage, the Richard Bachman novel that he wrote long time ago in the late 70s. And the only reason for that is that King has allowed the book to fall out of print, and he's kind of said he doesn't want people reading it. And so I just kind of said, okay, then I won't do that.
Yeah.
It has to do with like school shootings and the way some school shooters referenced this book, and King felt uncomfortable about that, and so he didn't want it circulating anymore. So kind of just honor his wishes. I will never say there won't be a time where I finally break my policy on that and read that book. Perhaps after King has passed away and I know that I will never get to read a new book from his again, I'll finally break down and read that book. But yeah, with Fairy Tale finished, that's the only one I haven't read.
All right.
Their other question is, Matt, if you did another podcast on reading a series, but the Matt and Scott roles were reversed, what book series would you want to read? Ooh, interesting.
Oh, let's see. Just to remind everyone, we literally did that before
We
with
did.
Worm. That
Yeah.
was kind of how we started. Worm being a superhero web serial, which we both love and still recommend.
Hmm.
If I did another one, um, I got Neil Stevenson on the brain lately because I actually went to see him speak, went to a book signing of his, and kind of he's one of those authors where like I've read everything he's ever written. Um, I think that would be a very different feel because he doesn't really write stories in the way that maybe in the way that our style works for, but maybe that would just mean that we have to kind of adjust our style, so it would be a growing experience. Since this is a hypothetical anyway, I'll just go with Neil Stevenson. And book series, I will just say the Baroque cycle because there are no rules. I can say whatever I want.
That's true. You can. All right. It works.
Bliss Orb says, I guess my question for Matt is, would you ever do a Dark Tower podcast without Scott and a new King newbie? So basically, I would be the guide. They say long days and pleasant nights to you, and it's a slippery slope and all that. Um, gosh, I feel like there's so many other things in the world to do. Like I feel like we did a good job on the Dark Tower,
Hmm.
and I'm ready to move beyond and do some other project. Like I think the podcasts we do are always a vehicle for growth. Um, and so I got to feel like I'm growing and doing something new. I would feel like I wasn't really growing if I did the Dark Tower again. And then there's also, and I'm not just saying this, the fact that like Scott specifically is the person that I enjoy doing podcasts with. Like I would have to like there's some hypothetical person who I don't even know who that would be, right? Like who would be my co-host in this scenario? It would have to be the right
Sure.
person, and I have no idea who that would be. And it's rare to find somebody who you have you have a rapport with, right? So
Oh,
yeah,
well, thank you. Yeah, I'll just give myself brain damage and we can just do it all over again.
that's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, Kid's Kitchen says, picture this. The Traveler's Rest. Sheb playing Hey Jude on the piano. Locals casting wary glances at the Batwing doors as they sing along. In walks Frodo, exhausted after completing his journey, in search of a drink because Mount Doom is hot as fuck. His furry feet take him to the bar, right next to an equally exhausted and dusty cowboy named Roland. There isn't a clean fingernail in sight. Who speaks first? Which part of the adventures would they share with each other? Matt, has to be a you question. I'm sorry. Like I can't answer this.
Um, who speaks first? I feel like
I feel
I
like
feel
that's
like
the easiest answer.
I feel like Frodo speaks first. Yeah,
Yeah. I just have a hard time thinking Roland would ever speak first. Yes. Sorry, continue.
yeah. And what does he share? I mean, Frodo's not typically neither of these characters is one to blab, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're both, especially if this is pre dropping off the ring, then they're both going to be pretty cagey about their respective journeys. Um, it is cool just to compare and contrast. Like they're both on a quest to right some cosmic wrong in their own eyes.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a very difficult idea seeing Roland like be pretty forthcoming with like the events of his quest.
yeah.
Um like I think even to his quartet, he takes a long time to feel close enough to them to kind of reveal his story. So this random weird short guy that walks up to him, I just have a hard time seeing that.
Another just interesting thing about this scenario is, Sam isn't here in this picture, and it's like it just reminds me that you know Frodo has no idea what's happened to his Katet, his fellowship. The only person who made it with him is Sam, and then Roland just you know habitually starts out with a Katet and then gradually loses everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both people who have this story of having friends and companions that they gradually lose. So maybe if they were going to have a conversation that was deep in any way, it would relate to that in some way, the shared pain of losing companions.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. Have you seen the theory that in the Peter Jackson films, Frodo does not know Legolas's name? You ever seen this theory?
No,
So,
no.
so the only line in the entire trilogy that Legolas says to Frodo is "You have my bow." That's all he ever says to him. And then at the very end of the movie, when like everyone's walking through the door, when Frodo wakes up in the bed, Gimli walks through and he mouths Gimli.
Gimli.
Legolas walks through and he just like smiles, and then Aragorn walks through and he goes Aragorn.
Oh my God.
So there's this theory that he doesn't know
Yeah.
Legolas's name.
He never learned his name in Rivendell, and then it was too awkward when they were on the road because he knew that Legolas's elf ears would hear if he were to be like, "Hey,
He was
Aragorn,
like, "Hey, what's his name?"
what's the elf's name?"
It's my new favorite thing.
Oh my
I just
God.
learned this the other day. It's my new favorite thing.
I'm so happy. Oh God, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Next from Betrayal Spree. Would you guys want to go back and read the books / short stories that Matt hasn't read to compare to the adaptations on other levels? I guess referring to the other levels of the tower bonus podcast that we do, where we've covered 75 million adaptations. I feel like we've done like most at this point, although there's still some that we haven't done, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked about like doing the one-off episodes, and once again, thank you everyone for the extremely positive reaction to the idea of doing kind of one-off episodes after the official end of the podcast. In my mind, I saw that as like things that were like new adaptations of things that we had covered. So, for example, the new Salem's Lot movie would be an excellent example of that. I think there's going to be if the Long Walk movie is ever released, that would be a great example of something we'd want to come back. So I didn't in my head see us like coming back to read more books. That's a little bit more work intensive on that show than I think we would want to do after the show has officially ended and we've moved on to other stuff. I will never say never, right? I just like broadly we're always open to stuff if it catches our fancy and we want to talk about it. So but I think going forward, our primary focus is going to be on Flanagan's Wake and going through that show. But there will be moments where perhaps one-offs that we think it's worth having a conversation about this new movie or new television show that's King related. And this feed would be a perfect place to do it.
Yeah.
Like there's a freaking Welcome to Derry show on HBO next year, and it's like I feel like we have to watch that and talk about it somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll definitely do some amount of all of the above, just not all of the above.
Yeah, I definitely don't think like we these bonus one-off episodes is like we're going to read a whole book and talk about it. We have enough of that going on already.
Yeah.
All right, David T says, I wanted to share my theory with you. It came to me on my third full reading of The Dark Tower as a whole 8 books. Why does what you call the time loop and what I call the Curse of Chasset even exist? It's because of Jake. When Susan dies in the fire and cries out, Roland, I love thee, it hit me. Jake is Roland and Susan's son, and in that moment Gan took him from Susan's womb and placed him on Earth. Then, when he was placed back in Roland's path when he was most desperate, Gan wanted to see if Roland would at that crucial moment choose Jake before the tower. When he didn't, and because Jake was so important, Gan made a way to bring him back. This gave the Crimson King a chance to bring about his own son, so to speak. This is why Roland was cursed and now has the Horn of Eld, and this is where he needs to stand and be true and not let his son fall. True Chasset for every 19 mini loops Roland made was one full loop. What we read is his 18th mini loop of the 19th full loop, making the loop Roland ends the book on his last chance to get it right. What do you think of this theory? Matt, what do you think of this theory?
Gonna have to brush up on some of the details here. I mean, it definitely makes a fun sort of ticking clock element added into this structure of a time loop. The idea that there's a certain number of time loops and then you run out. Although I will say I also like I also like just the idea of like, we're just going to keep doing this until you're fixed.
Yeah.
This is purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think purgatory as a concept is close to what the Dark Tower is trying to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, so let's zoom out from that. Talk more about the idea of Jake as Roland and Susan's son. Like, even if it's not metaphysically true, it's a really cool thematic idea that
Yeah.
he had that there was a child, you know, quote unquote, created by Roland and Susan, and that it was killed, and then he has he has a surrogate son later. It's like, yeah, that's a connection I never quite made. I'd probably, I think probably could stand to go back and think about this, actually, the idea of Roland's unborn son, and then later having then later we have Jake, and then we also have Mordred as this sort of two other sons. I'm rambling, but I like these ideas. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of Jake as. I mean, I almost don't think it ultimately matters if Jake is like literally the embodiment of Roland and Susan's son. Is that just he serves to represent that anyway? Like Roland having a son that he cast off is like it's interesting because I didn't read this. We didn't do this book. My son wasn't born yet, so like I was all saying this from the perspective of someone not as a parent, but like imagining sacrificing your child for anything now is to me like the most absurd thing you could ever say in your entire life. Like, no, I would never ever do that. So like, I mean, Jake was always supposed to serve as a surrogate son. Serving as his real son, it makes, I guess, kind of a fun metaphysical twist on the whole thing. I think I agree with you on the whole like 19 loops thing being like a ticking clock. I don't like that as much, just because I do like this broader idea of like, man, like that concept of death but not for you, gunslinger. Like, you will never be freed from this cycle. Like, you will never die because you are cursed to do this until you get it right. Is a much more delicious thing to me than the idea that there is one more chance not to fuck it up, buddy. But I mean, I think it's cool. Like, it's fun to have your own theories on how all this stuff works, and I think it's fleshed out just not enough to where you can kind of explore the nooks and crannies of this.
Yeah, I think to me, like you just said, the worst fate is to have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Rather than like Roland would be overjoyed to hear that his torture was over. Like, sweet oblivion.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Cool.
All right. E-Man 9001 says, any and all questions, you say. Number 1, Fairy Tale is a very divisive book. Personally, I love it. I put it in my top 19. Where do you guys put this in your King tier list? For me, it's bottom of S tier, but still S tier. Damn it. You know, I don't know if we want to do a full stack ranking right now. Yeah, I kind of can't say that it's one of my favorites, because we've read like basically mostly greatest hits in the course of this show.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also not like it's in no danger of being one of my least favorite ones either. I would, at this moment, I would put it toward the middle of the pack.
Yeah, I think that's where it would go. I mean, I compare this book a lot to The Talisman, for a lot of obvious reasons, and I think ultimately I like it as much as I enjoyed The Talisman, which I think for some listeners out there like is a damning statement, because they really do not like. The Talisman is a pretty divisive book as well. So I think I put it about there, which I think The Talisman is about middle of the pack for me. So yeah, I liked it. It will never in my mind be like one of my, like, I'm going to remember this book specifically because it was the last book we did on the show. I don't know if I had just read this book casually on my own, whether like 10 years from now, when I think about Stephen King, I'd be thinking about Fairy Tale, I guess is the damning with faint praise way of saying it.
Yeah. All right. Number 2, do you think that if all the top Stephen King podcasts sent their best warriors to fight in a fair one, that you two would be able to best the other podcasters in Mortal Kombat. Definitely.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. um,
Uh,
I like a lot of the other Stephen King podcasters. We've gotten to meet a few of them. They're all really great people.
yeah,
So I think I would just kill my captors and escape.
that's what I meant to say. we would band together against whoever had
Yeah.
put us in this terrible situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like if you made us, like, yeah. Totally.
There wouldn't even be a fight.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Number 3, boobs or butts?
I think on this answer, I would do that meme I've seen where like you draw a third option, which is personality,
Uh-huh.
but then put the check mark under boobs anyway.
Yeah. My joke answer was going to be yes.
Is this offensive? I don't know. I don't think so.
I think, a person's allowed to have opinions, right, Scott?
Sure.
Boobs it is. All right. What is your favorite Kingism line, such as he swallowed and there was a click in his throat, a wave of unreality washed over him, Jahoobies? I mean, we just talked about corn. I'm just going to go with corn because that's so awkward and I love it.
One of my favorite things King does is he makes people pee their pants a lot when they get scared. I know that like can be a thing, but I just feel like it happens more in the King universe than it does in real life. I have no evidence to support this, but I really do enjoy when people are constantly pissing their pants.
There's that one. There's also he laughed until tears squirted from the corners of his eyes.
Yeah.
And I think about that and it's like I like to laugh, and sometimes I laugh so much that I get tears in my eyes, but I would never use the word squirted to describe the physics of how that water enters my eyes. Personally, I don't know about you. Maybe Stephen King's tear ducts are a lot more like pressurized than mine.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely next time I laugh so much I cry, I'm gonna describe it as squirting from my eye. So
yeah, you made me laugh so hard, tears squirted into my eyes.
Oh, those are good questions. Thank you, E-Man. Next, we have Aqua Lungfish, who asks us a series of questions as well. If you were to suddenly come into possession of an illegal giraffe, how would you go about hiding it? It has to stay alive. Matt, where are you putting your giraffe?
It has to stay alive for how long?
It has to stay alive, Matt.
Well, like if you just gotta like keep it under wraps for 24 hours, I feel like I could hide it in my basement and it would be really uncomfortable. No, it couldn't get into my basement. There's no way it could fit into my basement. This is a full-grown giraffe.
I would assume so, yes.
I have nowhere to put a full-grown giraffe or any way to transport it. If we're assuming these logistical difficulties are not important, there's no answer to this. There's nowhere near me where I could hide a giraffe.
You just build a very deep hole in the ground and put it in there.
Right. I guess one answer is like you could find a spot in the like far away from anything, but then you'd have to get it there. Where does this question come from?
From the mind of Aqua Lungfish.
Well, thank you, Aqua Lungfish. I have no idea. This is going to bother me.
That's a really difficult question, actually. Is that damn neck? It's that damn neck. What do you do with it?
Yeah. Is anyone really in possession of a giraffe?
A zoo.
Fair enough. Okay, fine.
The next question is, how are you guys doing? Are you feeling okay? But how about the way everything went with the show? Yeah, I'm feeling real good. Matt, how are you feeling?
I feel great.
I mean, if I'm being entirely honest with myself and all you people, I'm a little nervous about the end of the show, just because we're taking something that is fairly successful and choosing to end it, which is always, I think, is ultimately like the right thing to do, but it's still a little bit of a nerve-wracking decision to make. It was a nerve-wracking decision to make when we first made it. It continues to be today, especially as we see like the sentiment from people coming out, how bummed they are about the end of the show. Like it does make me go, yeah, still ending it though.
Uh-huh.
But no, I feel pretty good. I feel very excited about where we're going from here. I also feel pretty excited to get like a little bit of a break in between the end of this thing and the start of the next one. It's been going pretty hard for a while. So
Yeah.
no, I feel good.
Yeah, the next show is also going to just be different in a number of ways,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's going to be an adjustment. But I like I just said a bit ago, like part of what this project is for me is an opportunity to stretch myself and do things that I wouldn't normally do, and so it's an opportunity in that sense. So it's a mild source of anxiety because you're like, oh, I don't know, might not go perfectly immediately, but then it's like, yeah, but that like then you get an opportunity to improve, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, for sure. I mean, there is something to be said for like stagnation in a certain format. Like we've been doing this format for almost 5 years now, the kind of the same thing week after week, and it's a good format that works for us. But I think for our growth and just general enjoyment, like getting challenged again, like not knowing exactly how this new thing is going to go, is exciting. So I agree with that for
Yeah.
sure. All right. Their last question is, this may not have been asked at some point in the history of the show, but who out of King's characters who is not from the main Dark Tower series best embodies the gunslinger label? That is a really good question. Matt, what do you think? Who is the best gunslinger, not an actual gunslinger?
Well, the one that jumps to mind is Jack Sawyer, adult version, obviously.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can't really think of one that would be like an obvious. Pangborn is a pretty solid gunslinger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Detective Man.
Detective Man?
Um,
I could help you here, but I'm just going to leave you drowning a little bit here. Detective Man? You read the whole book. This trilogy is named after him.
I was gonna say no. See, I was trying to think of his middle name so that could be the joke. But
Does
yeah,
he have one?
no, sorry, his first name, right? Bill Hodges. What's his? Is there a
Oh,
joke about
Kermit, yeah.
Kermit? Yeah, Kermit.
Yeah.
Kermit. Yeah.
Bill Hodges is a great answer. Yeah. I'm gonna go with Edgar Fremantle just because I really like that dude.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know if that's a good answer. It just felt right to me when I thought of it. Edgar Fremantle from Doohickey.
Sure, these are all good gunslingers. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the honest truth is King writes this character archetype fairly frequently. He likes characters like this. He likes characters that are kind of like this uncomfortable mix of good and bad, but have this kind of steel at their core that allows them to get over their trials and tribulations. He likes these characters a lot.
I just want to tell you that as I was thinking for his middle name, my mind kept returning Elmo. And I was like, it's not Elmo. I know I'm in the vicinity of Elmo, but it's not Elmo.
Yeah, I mean, you were close.
It's a Muppet. Yeah. Oh well. All right. Steve Living Room says, lots of questions. Who was your favorite? Sorry, what was your favorite moment of the show? Probably. What?
I think we're about to answer the same thing. So go ahead.
Oh no, I don't have an answer.
Oh, I was gonna say the trip to Bangor and the live show was like far and above like my favorite moment from the show. I mean, it's probably not what Steve is asking. He's probably asking like in the recording show proper, like what was our favorite conversation? But that's a harder question that I don't know the answer to because there's hours and hours and hours of that. But like my favorite single experience during the course of doing this show was getting to hang out with all of y'all that could make it in Bangor. That was an incredible moment. Once again, thank you to Sam and Jody for making that happen for us. but that was like the highlight of my entire podcasting career.
Yeah.
Was that.
And also Robin was like the most delightful guest imaginable.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Like,
Yes,
it was like that. It would have been a wonderful experience regardless, but she was just amazing. And that just transcended.
Yeah, we talked about this in the recap of the whole live event, but like one thing going into the weekend, we were like very sure the tour was going to go great. Everyone was going to love it. The trivia thing that Jody and Sam put together was going to go great. Everyone was going to love it. The only thing that we were uncertain on was like, were we going to have an interesting enough live show? And we had talked to Robin a few times before, and I really liked talking with her, but like she was incredible on the day. Yeah, I loved that conversation so much.
Yep. Next question is, what was your favorite single book from all 3 seasons?
Matt, this feels like a more important question for you than for me.
Yeah. Well, the answer that I gave last time somebody asked this was Low Men in Yellow Coats, because it just really touched me. And I also have said like, yeah, but also that answer changes from day to day, depending on like my mood and kind of what I want out of stories at that exact moment. That's definitely always going to be near the tip top of the list. I think just like the drawing of the 3 is also just like the most fun book, which is a different kind of favorite.
Sure.
So those I guess would be my like depending on which which side of the bed I get up on, one of those 2.
Yeah.
You have an answer?
Yeah, I mean, my answer was, and always will be it. I love that novel. I loved rereading it. I loved dissecting it. I loved spending, 4 months in it. It was a very long time, but I just adore that book, and I always will. I think like The Dark Tower as a whole is probably more important to me than it, but I think that is my favorite single book that we've covered and possibly ever.
Yeah. Who is your favorite character from all 3 seasons books?
Dear God. I don't know.
Yeah.
Roland. That's a cop-out answer, but sure. I mean, I like, in all seriousness, I do really, really love Roland Deschain, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like Eddie Dean just a huge amount. I also really like Jake. I like a lot of the kid characters, you know. I have a real soft spot for Ralph Roberts, like because he's such a sort of unlikely hero, you know.
Sure, yeah.
And he's a very specific, like it's funny, he didn't come up in our conversation about Gunslingers because it's like he's just this old man who can't not help, you know. That's kind of love that guy. Also, I could easily say like it's too hard to pick from it. Like so many of the it characters are so good that it's almost like it makes it harder to pick because so many of the characters are so good in it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I just said a lot of names, but
sure.
I don't. Yeah. Next question. Will you ever announce the writing contest winners, or at least let everyone read them and vote?
So
we will.
So to be clear, we did release the vote on Patreon, and their patrons voted for a winner. We know who won the contest. We just wanted to do our recording where we like read each of them and released a recording of that, and we just have never been able to do that. So like, did we ever pay the winners? I don't think we did. We need to do that.
I don't know. Look, we're not going to do this again. And the fact is, we're bad at this,
We're
and
very
and,
bad at this.
and we're sorry, and we feel bad.
Yeah.
Um, it was supposed to be a fun little thing, and then you realize that it's actually work, and then you forget because nobody's your boss telling you to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
And then so much time goes by that it like just becomes a thing
I,
that
I so f- yeah. For my part, look, this is not an excuse. This is like embarrassing. But I thought we had done this. I'm totally serious. Like, somebody sent us an email, and I was like, "What are you talking about? We did this." And I was literally thinking of the first book, the first writing
yeah.
contest. Like, and this is stupid and embarrassing, but like, that's my only excuse. Is like, I just thought we had done it already. I'm an idiot. I'm sorry.
No, so what actually happened is we hadn't done it forever, and then like you got one of your trademarked Matt like spurs of motivation that you just suddenly get where you're just like I'm going to do this, and you
Uh-huh.
like banged it out in like a day where you finally got everything set up,
Uh-huh.
made me finish reading the stories, um, and released the vote on Patreon, and then we did the vote on Patreon. The winners won based on the Patreon vote, and then we just had to do the part where we had to record ourselves reading the stories, get together, discuss the stories, and release that bonus episode. And just that's the part we never did. And
Oh.
I think in the back of our heads we were like, we don't want to like announce the winners because that's the method that we normally announce the winners. So I think the person who sent us an email was the winner. That saw that they were the winner on Patreon and emailed us like,
God,
"Hey,
I'm such.
I saw that I won.
What the
What are
fuck
you
is wrong
guys
with me?
doing?" Don't. It's not your fault.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation, Scott. Anyway,
So the long answer is yes, we will definitely do that before Flanagan's Wake starts.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, we'll do that. Cool. Last question. What is the weirdest thing King wrote that you've covered? Corn sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird.
I mean,
This.
we only covered one short story collection, and I think his weirdest stuff normally falls in his short stories because I think in his mind there's like throwaway experiments that don't really matter. I mean, Night Shift didn't have too many like really, really out there stories, but I had a few.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Lawnmower Man short story. That was pretty weird.
Yeah, that was definitely pretty weird. I mean, even Graveyard Shift was like, we're gonna do giant spooky rats. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lawnmower Man has to win that. I mean, Gray Matter was really weird too, like the beer that turns you into a monster.
Yeah.
I think it's Lawnmower Man though. What a fucking weird story. I think that's the answer.
There's something really weird about the Trash Can Man as a character.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's a good number of answers there.
Yeah. Last but not least, we have Ben Westward who says, given Stephen King's illustrious 50-plus year career spanning almost 80 books, there are going to be some that are widely beloved, some that are divisive but still compelling, some that were a product of their times, and some that flat out missed the mark. In retrospect to the 3 seasons of Kingslingers, which book would you ask Stephen King to take another turn at editing to release an expanded and revised throughout, a la The Gunslinger or The Stand? That's a really good question, actually.
Part of me really would like to see, not so I love The Long Walk so much, but part of me is like, what does that book look like with all of his writing powers directed at it, and not like, one of the first books that he ever wrote, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. Because I think that is a really, really good book. But
Mm-hmm.
you just imagine him with more writing power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna stick only to like the 3 seasons that we've done, because there's obviously other books that I could think this of, but like I think Insomnia would maybe be a good candidate for this. And like, I say that with the expanded and revised throughout being maybe mostly revisions and less expansions. I don't think that book needs to be longer. But I do wonder, like, he's talked about that book in the past and how it just gets a little too plotty. And I wonder, like, if he were to take another pass at that and maybe tighten it up, clean it up a little bit. It's a book I really enjoyed pieces of and the characters, but I think some of the book gets in its own way a little bit. So I think Insomnia would be a good candidate for that.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
yeah,
that's
cool.
it. That's
it. We did it.
It's over.
Wow.
Thank you all for those questions. And just so you know, like, so next week is going to be our series finale episode. We're kind of going to be pretty loose with like what that means. I really, the things I have planned for this are really just Matt and I to kind of muse on what this show has meant for us. And what we think we've learned and all that kind of stuff for about an hour or so. So it's going to be a pretty like loose conversation show, unlike all the other episodes, which are not loose at all. All that to be said, like, if you didn't get your discussion question answer in on time, like if you have any more questions that you've realized after that you couldn't send to us, like, there will be time and opportunity in that episode to answer some more questions. So if you want to go ahead and send those in, please feel free. Also, please make sure you send those voicemails in to us as well. We really do want those. But yeah, I mean, that's it for this week. Next week is the series finale, where we're going to look back at 4.5 years, almost 5 years of content, and kind of try to wrap this thing all up in one excellent episode. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I think it's just gonna be a lot of emotional reminiscing from me, and Matt probably calling me ridiculous a few times.
Yeah, that sounds about right. No, that'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
All right. Remember, you can reach us with those recorded audio snippets at kingslingerspod@gmail.com. Of course, you can always follow us on Twitter at kingslingerspod to sort of stay in the loop with any future plans. And the Reddit, of course, will always be the hub for all things Doof Media, even this show or Flanagan's Wake or anything else. That's reddit.com/r/Doof Media.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to get any Doof Media or Kingslingers merch, you can do that at doofmedia.myshopify.com. We're going to leave all that stuff up there even as the show comes to an end. So if you just didn't quite get in on time to get your Kingslingers mug, well, it'll still be there for you into perpetuity, forever. So you can check out the shop and get the stuff there. And of course, we will have merch for Flanagan's Wake as we prepare to launch that in the coming weeks as well. So make sure you're checking that store for that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think another thing we'll probably do in next week's episode is kind of lay out in maybe a little bit more detail our plans for Flanagan's Wake. I think we've announced the show. We've given a schedule like of what we're going to be covering and when, but I think we could maybe talk about it a little bit more next week and kind of prepare you for the transition there.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you like Kingslingers, you like the idea of Flanagan's Wake, you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. We're going to keep doing, our bonus stuff. We finished Castle Talk, but we're starting relatively soon. We're starting coverage of the TV show From on the bonus podcast. So that's one reason to go over to the Patreon and sign up.
I think you folks are going to really enjoy that. I certainly am. So please make sure you don't miss that.
Yeah.
And if you cannot afford to join us on Patreon now or tomorrow or in January when Flanagan's Wake begins, that is absolutely okay. You can help us by sharing the podcast. Please continue to share Kingslingers. Please continue to leave rating and reviews. And also, just prepping you guys, when we launch the new show, those two things become more important than ever. Like, lots of reviews off the bat. Listen to the first episode. If you like it, review bomb. Sharing the podcast is really important. This is going to be like the second to last spotlight review I read out loud here, Matt. So this is from Constant Reader 1127, who gives us 5 stars and says, "One from many. I found Kingslingers during the pandemic, and it remains a definitive podcast on the works of Cy King. Scott and Matt bring intelligence and thought-provoking discussions to each episode, no matter the book. The community built from the series truly defines Katet. We are one from many. Thank you, Size, for all you have done since the inception of the show. Here's to a few more conversations before the clearing at the end of the path." Oh, no.
What an emotional...
I'm going to get really emotional here, Matt.
I know. I've pointed this out before, but I just think it's really funny how everyone in this community, and particularly the people who write reviews, are just incredibly eloquent writers.
Yes.
It's almost like these people like to read a lot.
Yeah.
And it influences their ability to write.
How come it doesn't work for me?
It does.
No. Well, thank you, constant reader. And again, thank you to everyone. We will only, I guess let me look here. Let me look how many more. We've got 2 reviews right now that I haven't read. So maybe we'll just read both of those on the last episode. So we can
all right.
Just clean break.
Yeah. There. Clean break. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you to everyone who sent those in, and thank you everyone for joining us on this book. We hope you'll check out our final episode next week. I think it's going to be a good time. But until then, long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.